Welcome to another weekly GameDev Log. This week I was focusing mostly on the artwork and fleshing out the look and feel of the game and the user interface. Day 1 I started out working on some simple UI elements. I wanted to move away from the solid bar for the heads-up display and replace them with some floating UI style elements. I created some plain white capsule images that I could then tweak in Unity to be whichever colour I want. In Unity, I created a new UI element prefab, which has two of these capsule images, one slightly larger than the other, and the outside one being plain white to give it a border that would ensure it would pop. I opted for a bluish purple colour, as that seemed to work really well with the orange-brown look of the menu background and the level. I created two of these new floating UI elements and used them in combination with the lives and the star icons on the level select screen to create the new heads-up display. Moved on to work on the heads-up display for the level screen. This was slightly different than the menu screen as there was no lives timer, and there's also the countdown for the level. I managed to reuse the cooking pot asset for use as an icon for the level score on the heads-up display, which majorly improved the look. This bluish purple colour of the HUD elements worked so well that I decided I wanted to use that colour for any of the pop-up user interfaces. This included the in-game menu screen that shows up at the start of the level. I revisited the HUD for the level select screen. I originally wanted to create a new sand timer icon for the lives timer. Instead, I settled for a simpler alternative for now, which was to combine two of the floating UIs to make it clear that the timer was related to the lives. After a quick playthrough, I realised I'd missed a few things. First of all, I hadn't put the white border around the level start screen. Secondly, I had completely forgotten to apply this new style to the end game screen. After fixing up the endgame screen, I had a final playthrough and I was fairly happy with the results. At the end of this day, I didn't feel like I got a whole lot done, but it's these little tweaks that add to the polish and the appeal of the game, so it's definitely worth it. Day 2 was all about animation. I hadn't done any animation in Krita yet, but I was excited to get stuck in. Krita has keyframe animation with onion skinning. This essentially means that you have to create all the frames of the animation either by drawing or modifying previous frames. The onion skin is essentially a way to see a number of the next and previous frames as guides to draw your current frame. I started off by drawing the bubble in one of its keyframes. I chose a frame that was somewhere in the middle of its lifetime, so I could then judge the early and late keyframes from this. I then inserted early keyframes by simply shrinking the initial frame in steps to give the appearance of a growing bubble. I then went through all the intermediary frames using the onion skins as a guide. You can see the onion skins as the slightly faded green and red coloured versions of the bubble. Adding those intermediate frames ensures the animation is smooth and video-like, as opposed to just a series of pictures. I did some tweaks to the position of the bubbles, as I had noticed the way that I was scaling the bubbles had caused them to look as though they were growing sideways, rather than the more realistic look of going from the centre. Once this was looking realistic, I moved on to work on the next portion of the bubble animation. I wanted the bubble to grow to a certain size, then turn into a floating bubble, and finally pop. This next section required me to do a little more work. I could no longer simply resize the bubble and tweak it slightly. Instead, I had to warp, modify, and often create completely new keyframes from the previous ones. After a lot of tweaking, I finally had something that resembled a bubble growing and then popping. I decided to call it a day and import it into Unity to see what the animation would look like in the engine. I started day 3 seeing what the pop looked like with a few bubbles in it. Unfortunately, it looked a bit strange as all the bubble animations played at exactly the same time, which isn't very realistic. To combat this, I then set out creating a bubble spawner script, which would add variations to the scale, speed, and position of the bubbles that were being spawned. I exposed these min and max values for the speed, scale, and position to the inspector window of Unity, as it took a little bit of tweaking the values before it really looked right. Eventually I managed to get the values bob on and ended up with some awesome looking bubbles. The only issue is that currently the bubbles play constantly, even when the level hadn't started and the pot wasn't cooking. I hooked up the new bubble spawner game object to the game events for the level start and end, and it worked like a charm. So it's not bubbling, hold space, starts bubbling. Bubbles should stop spawning at least. Awesome. So that's it for this week. Hope you've all enjoyed it. I've managed to learn a load of new animation skills and the game is getting those additions that make it look a little more polished. There's still a lot to work on. I think next week I'll be focusing more on the functionality and working towards that minimum viable product. Once again, if you like what you see, then don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel or come join me on Twitch, and while I'm developing you can have your own input on the development of the game.